So sometimes we've developed these little projects to start with in sewing that help you understand how to do certain techniques. The seam sampler is one of those things. It's going to teach you how to do all different seams that you're going to use and different hems that you're going to use and different machinery that you're going to be using constantly. And the beauty of this is it's made out of muslin. You can always cut another piece of muslin. You can always redo it. It's not expensive. It gives you an opportunity to really practice your techniques before you start on a garment. I always think that's the right way to approach teaching sewing, is to do techniques first, and then you're relaxed, you're comfortable with the machine, and then you start doing a garment. Okay? So this is a very beautiful technique. So the first goal of every morning when you come in is to get the stitch working really nicely. There's no point in starting a stitch square, starting a garment, doing anything until you're wholly comfortable with the way the stitch looks. And of course, you need to look at both sides. Very often students look at the top and think, oh, it looks great. And particularly, you're going to find in draping and pattern making, when you use shearing thread, that really screws up the tension. So it takes a little bit of playing with. Okay, I'm pretty loving my stitch. When you really love your stitch, you're ready to sew. Okay? What I'm going to be doing is stitch and pink. Okay? Where do we use that seam? Many of you might think, well, you know, pinking scissors are pretty old-fashioned, and in fact they are. But I'll tell you, I love my pinking scissors. It's a great way to finish the edge, a raw edge, and not have it ravel. It's great when you're traveling. You can easily take your pinking shears with you. Saves the problem of carrying around an overlock machine. And sometimes you don't want the thickness of an overlocked stitch to finish the raw edge of a fabric. I like the way a pinking edge looks. And a stitch in pink is an excellent way to finish the raw edge of a seam to have it not ravel. So what I'm going to be doing in order to create my seam sampler is this. I'm going to be taking 2 pieces of muslin. I'm going to be putting raw edges together, and ideally what I'm really doing is I'm putting right sides together, the right sides of the fabric. There is no right and wrong side of muslin, but if I was using a print like your top, I would have the sides of the print kissing each other, because when you open it up, you would want the print to be with the seam not exposed. So right sides together, and the important thing is because we've cut these 2 pieces on the same grain, they stretch the same amount, so they'll be able to line up exactly. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a regular seam allowance. What do I mean by that? I mean that I'm just sewing a seam that I don't want to come out, and I'm going to be sewing along at 1 inch. So from the needle to the raw edge, it's 1 inch. How do I know? You have lines along your sewing machine right here, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, and 1. If I line up my fabric just to the line of the left of the number, that gives me a 1 inch seam allowance. If you're not sure, take a tape measure and measure from your needle to the raw edge, and you'll see it's 1 inch. Now, when I say a regular seam, I don't want the seam to fall out. In order to make sure the seam doesn't fall out, I'm going to take a few stitches. Make sure you give your 2 little threads a tug so they don't jam up. I'm going to reverse, and that locks the stitch. Slowly and carefully, I'm going to sew to the end of my piece of muslin, and when I get to the end, I'm going to reverse again a few stitches, and this locks the stitch. Needle in the uppermost position, let it flow out, and we're going to clip the threads. So that's all I've done, a 1-inch seam allowance. The next step, I am going to just press this open, and then I'm going to stitch at 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge, and then I'm going to pink it, okay? So let me just go to the iron and press this open. Seam allowances. I'm now holding the seam allowance singly. I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch from the edge. And again, I'm going to do a regular seam, which means take a few stitches, reverse, and sew very slowly and carefully right to the bottom. You're going to do this on both sides. After you sew the 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge, I'm going to take my pinking scissors and pink. I like to stitch and then pink. You're welcome to try pinking and then stitching and see which, do it on one side and one on the other, see what you like. I'm just showing you what I have liked to do. There's a million ways to. So now that we've created one seam, now we know that which is the right side and the wrong side. For all intents and purposes, this is the inside of the garment and this is the outside, correct? So this is the right side. So the next piece of muslin I take, I'm going to place right sides together, okay? Everyone see what I mean? And then the next seam, oh, okay. And the next seam that I'm going to do is called a tailor's edge. Okay? A tailor's edge is a very useful seam to finish the inside of the garment. To finish the inside of a garment of a silk fabric, what it does is it folds under 1/4 of an inch, the raw edge, and stitches very close to the edge, okay? And this is, you'll often in very high-end silk blouses see seams finished this way, straight seams, not curved seams. It's good for a straight seam. So it's a very useful seam in a high-end garment to finish under. So again, 1-inch seam allowance. Take a few stitches, reverse, make sure that you give your threads a little tug.
You're giving that tug after you start stitching?
Yeah, you can give it before and after. And so slowly, carefully, right to the end. I like to always clip my threads as I go. It's a good habit to get into. And there's my next seam, right? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press this seam open, okay? I'll go press it and I'll be right back. So really what I want is I'm going to flip the seam allowance and sew from this side, correct? Okay. I want to hold it under 1/4 of an inch, but I'm going to do that by eye. I'm not going to press it or spend the time to measure it. So I'm just going to start, and there's my 1/4 of an inch. And I want to sew very close to the edge, correct? So what I'm going to do, there's a little trick. Number one, I'm going to hold the seam allowance very taut, very tight, and I'm going to angle it slightly from the left And it's a good way to get it very close to the edge. If you do it directly straight, it's not as easy. If you angle it, it's a little easier to get it closer to the edge. And when I say the edge, I want it approximately 1/16 of an inch from the edge. So again, I'm going to take a few stitches, reverse, and holding the seam allowance tight, I'm angling it from the left. Do you see how there's a slight angle happening? And I'm finding it relatively easy, simple, but relatively easy, to sew very close to the edge. You're going to do this all the way down. Take a few stitches at the end, reverse, and clip.